Martin Luther King Jr. said the following: "Love is the only force capable of turning an enemy into a friend." You may have heard this saying. You may have even shared it with your friends through a meme or an e-signature. But how does love actually do this? What role does compassion have in this transformation? And is this really true? I have always been interested in understanding love. And in 2020, I created the Love and Compassion podcast with Giselle to understand how love can help us transform our most difficult circumstances into the gifts they bring. My daughter did the logo. It's pretty cool. I get to hear the most extraordinary stories of people doing the unthinkable, loving those who are most hurtful. And I get to hear both sides of the story, from people who have been hurting others to the people impacted by the hurtful behavior. People like my friend, Rukai Abdul Mutakalan, who instead of punishing the people who killed her son, got curious. Rukai received a phone call letting her know that her son was on life support after he had been shot for $40 in takeout. When Rukai went to the courthouse to face the assailants, she realized they were both under 16. She told me that when she saw their faces, she saw her son. She heard their stories of intergenerational trauma and violence and decided not to punish them. Instead, she decided to help them. She now helps young people address intergenerational trauma. And every day she saves the lives of kids like her son and the people who harmed him. From Rukai, I learned that forgiveness begins with self-forgiveness. That curiosity is the stepping stone to compassion, and that true love is seeing everyone as your son or daughter. This is Lara Naughton. She was on vacation in Belize when she was kidnapped and assaulted at gunpoint by a man posing as her cab driver. He was going to kill her because he didn't want to go to jail. When she decided to lean into his story, she discovered that he had lost custody of his son that day and that his son was the person he loved most in the world. She also found out that he had tried to commit suicide that day before meeting her. Leaning into his pain saved her life. The more she leaned in, the more he began to see someone worth saving. And in fact, in the end, drove her back to her hotel as if he was her cab driver because he wanted her to be safe. From Lara, I learned that people who see themselves as victims are more likely to hurt other people, and that our well-being is intricately interconnected with the well-being of other human beings. On the other side of the spectrum, you got people like Tony McAllier. He was the lead in Canada's white supremacy movement. And he actually built a lot of the underground communication systems which may still exist today. Compassion from a Jewish therapist and the unconditional love of his children got him to realize that hate was not the way. And in fact, he began work on reparations for his crimes. What I learned from Tony was that people can do hurtful things when they're so separated from their own shameful feelings. And the key to ending that is helping them reconnect with those difficult feelings through compassion. Tony now helps people leave hate groups. As I listened to these stories and many others, I began to wonder, are these extraordinary people, or are they just like us? Can we do this? I believe our essence is loving and compassionate, but we have so removed ourselves from who we truly are, we don't recognize this essence anymore. We have built walls around our hearts due to fear. But our natural inclination is not to hurt other beings. This is why we have to dehumanize them first before we can oppress them. I also saw this when I was working in the child protection system. One of the things I heard again and again from staff was about the irrationality of the children. How can they love their parents and want to be with them when they're so abusive? I thought, what if they're onto something? Not for wanting to go back to abusive homes, but for loving despite. I believe we're all capable of doing this. And to answer one of the questions I had posed earlier, yes, it's true. Love has the power to transform. But how does it do this? That's a little harder to answer. For that, I'd like to share my own story. This is me as a baby. The things I remember about being young was that I loved my dinosaur pop-up book that my parents got me. I had a little red chickadee that would play music when I would pull the string. And I genuinely felt a love for people. As a kid, I remember asking myself, why do people fight? Why can't they just love each other? It didn't make sense in my little brain because all I wanted was to love and to be loved. But as I grew older, I faced abuse and trauma and built walls around my heart. I became a different person. But I remember when I said I was always interested in love? It's true. Yeah. I was interested in understanding love from its absence. Why people abuse their children. And so I went to work in the child protection system for many years. And I discovered a system that placed a lot of barriers to love. So I became this huge advocate for the voice and participation of children and for compassionate spaces and places. Our systems could use a little bit more kindness, couldn't they? Yeah. But hands up, anyone tried to change systems before? Anyone tried to? Yeah. Anyone successful? Yeah, then there's no hands there. Well, I wasn't successful. But one of the things I noticed, though, when I took a close look, was that these systems reflected how I acted when I was hurt. When people hurt me, I wanted them to be punished so that they would never do it again. Or I wanted them as far away from me as humanly possible. Being on earth was too close to me. And if you look at our systems, they're based on separation, isolation, punishment. So I realized that the way to change these systems was to change myself, and then they would change. And I worked very hard on myself, with my self-love and my self-compassion, and I genuinely thought I got it. I'm a compassionate person, look at me, such a big advocate. Until one day, the details of this story don't matter. I find that when I give people details, they get really stuck in the story. You were right, they were right. What matters is my experience with shame. There was an incident at work. Somebody did something that needed addressing, and I was responsible for addressing it as the leader. This didn't impact me directly. I was just supposed to get the person back on track. So from my perspective, I met with the person in my office, told them what they needed to do to move forward, felt good about myself at having helped them, and I moved on to the next task. Fast forward months later, I meet with that same person on an unrelated matter with 2 other people. And it comes out in that meeting that this person thinks I'm an oppressive person. And the worst part, they were afraid of me. So you can imagine as someone who had touted themselves as this compassionate person hearing this. What could have been a moment of conversation, clarification, reconciliation, maybe forgiveness, turned into a total disaster. I got defensive. It made the situation so much worse. This person left the meeting feeling bad about themselves and me, and I left the meeting feeling shame and guilt. I would realize that the reason why I got defensive was because this person's perspective completely invalidated how I viewed myself. I was a fraud. I'd been outed. But lucky for me, I was already practicing compassion at the time and could hold space for those difficult feelings. Can we just all admit that love and compassion get a bad rap? Yeah? People think that if you're compassionate to yourself and loving, you're just going to excuse your crappy behavior. You don't. One of the hardest things to do is to love yourself when you don't think you deserve it. But as my family can attest, I cried a lot during that time. And as I kept crying, I kept leaning in and loving so that I could understand how I had hurt this person. And I learned some pretty key things. Number one, I had completely missed the human being in front of me. I treated them like a task to be accomplished instead of someone requiring my care and attention. I hadn't even noticed how they felt about me in that meeting. Number two, I was not living my values. That one was a tough one for me to admit. I was telling people they should be compassionate and loving, but I was not being caring and loving, not the way I wanted to be. Number three, I'm the villain in somebody's story, and I'm the hero in someone else's. But I'm neither. I'm just me, doing the best I can, always trying to be more loving, failing sometimes, getting it right other times, but always just trying to be and to have more love. I think the problem that we have with love and compassion is that people think you have to do it perfect. You don't. Rukai, Lara, Tony, they didn't get it right 100% of the time, but they were willing. You just have to be willing. Number four, the more love and compassion I have for myself, the less I need other people to act a specific way. And the more I can love others from my overflow and not from my reserves. I would love to see compassion-based training for people that are doing hurtful behavior, such as bullying and harassment, and for race and equity issues. Why? I have seen people get defensive, shut down conversations, get angry, because they couldn't deal with those difficult feelings at the detriment of their own relationships. I feel that compassion would help us lean to ourselves and others a little bit more. I would also love to see compassion-based training for people who are impacted by the hurtful behavior. Because I feel like if they acknowledge their own emotions with love and validate them, they won't need other people to do that. They have already done that for themselves. Now you may be asking me, okay, Giselle, like, come on, how do I do this? Where do I begin? And to answer that, I want to share one more story of a person I would love to have on my podcast. This is Daryl Davis, Black jazz musician out of the US, who as a kid wondered, why are people racist? So he decided to ask. Imagine that. A black man going to KKK rallies and talking to leaders and asking one question. Why do you hate me when you don't even know me? And through those conversations, he got over 200 of them to leave the Klan. But the key part of the story is this. He didn't seek to change them. He sought to understand them. And in that understanding, he created the conditions that enabled them to change. But of course, from my perspective, Mr. Davis could not have done this without holding space for his own difficult feelings in light of some pretty racist conversations. So if I could leave you with one thing today, it would be this. If, like Martin Luther King Jr., you want to turn an enemy into a friend, or just address a conflict in your life, get curious. Just get curious. And by becoming curious like me, you will find your life and the world around you transformed. Thank you.